Hi, everyone that's here so far. I am just admitting everyone as they join the waiting room here. Um, Looks like we have more joining. I will get started with the presentation in a couple minutes here. For those of you joining, if you want to go ahead and just mute your mics right away, and then we don't have any feedback, that would be awesome.
Zifite uretse ndaza kumuvugisha.
I'm-
Uretse ndaza kumuvugisha.
I'm sorry, what was that? I'll also see if I can share my screen. That's what I want. Okay. Do I- There we go. Okay, I think I've admitted everyone that's come in so far. So hi everyone again, thanks for joining today. For me, it's morning here. It's right at the start of my workday at 8 a.m. Getting a few messages here. Awesome, thank you. I'm glad that you're here too. Perfect. So make sure I haven't missed anyone. All right. And for those of you joining too, I'm actually going to be doing another webinar for all of you this time next week, Wednesday as well. It'll be on a different topic, but so if you are available at that time. Today I'm presenting on financial aid opportunities and funding. Next week, I'm going to be presenting more about STEM programs and kind of like different majors within STEM and kind of what you can do with them with the STEM majors in the United States, where you can go to study these majors. So it's science, technology, engineering, and math is STEM. So I'll be presenting on that next week. All right, and I've got a few minutes after here, so I'll try to keep on top of admitting those who join us as they come in. But for purposes of time, I will get started. So again, hi everyone. My name is Anna Borkhart, and I am an admissions counselor here at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. We are located right in downtown Milwaukee. Milwaukee is in Wisconsin in the United States, so we're pretty far north in the United States. I've been in my current role for almost 4 years now, so I do work with actually a variety of students, so graduate and transfer and international students, working with all 3 types of populations there. So again, today I'm going to be talking about financial aid opportunities and funding. And so it's going to be very general, like how you can, well, finance your way through your education here in the United States. And I will leave time for questions at the end. You can definitely feel free to type them in the chat, and I will address them at the end. Otherwise, you can just wait till the end as well. So I will jump right in here, and I'll try to keep on top of admitting people who pop in the lobby here. Anyway, all right. So hopefully you can all see my screen and hear me okay. If anything pops up that you can't hear me or suddenly can't see the screen or anything, please let me know. You can let me know in the chat. Okay, so financial aid opportunities and funding. So this is kind of what's on the agenda for today's presentation. We'll go over the different types of financial aid, how to apply specifically for scholarships, finding additional funding. I'm assuming maybe those scholarships, either you're having trouble getting them, or you just need more funding, because of course, who doesn't want more funding for their education? The less you have to pay out of pocket, the better. And I will also talk about specifically kind of how this looks at MSOE, how like we award scholarships and kind of what students can expect. And again, for those of you joining, if you can unmute your mics, that would be super helpful so I don't get any feedback here on my computer. And then finally, like I said, I will leave time for a Q&A session. So. Okay, so types of financial aid. Like I said, I'm going to start off with that. So there's several different kinds, and I'll talk about specifically what's most applicable to most international students. Yes, I'll go over that in more detail here. Let's see. Okay. So a few different kinds. There are more kinds than this as well, but these are just kind of some top kinds that I'm going to be addressing in this session. So first, there are going to be loans. So this is basically just borrowing money that does need to be paid back later with interest. So typically over time, that interest will accrue depending on where you're getting that loan from. That interest rate can vary quite a bit. So you're gonna have to pay back the money that you borrow in addition to, it's kind of like a fee for borrowing that money, and like the longer you take to pay it back, the more that's going to increase. So you definitely want to pay those off as soon as you financially can. Scholarships are free money, essentially, typically either from the institution itself or from external sources, and we'll talk about that later too. But free money that doesn't need to be paid back. It's often based on some sort of criteria, whether that's merit, so how well you do, how well you've done in school thus far, maybe on talent, or a particular area of study. So maybe it's just that you're going into a certain program or anything like that. So usually there's some criteria that is given to you based on grants are kind of similar. Money, it's typically money that doesn't need to be paid back. It's just kind of money that's granted to you. You would only need to pay it back under certain circumstances. So depending on the institution and who's giving you the grant, maybe if you withdraw from the school, or maybe there's a certain obligation that you needed to fulfill to be receiving that. And if you didn't, then you might have to pay that back, or it might simply be withdrawn and not granted to you anymore. But typically, if that's granted to you and you follow through on what you need to do, you get to keep that money and don't need to pay it back. Sponsorships. So that's typically money from, whether it's a relative, like a family member, maybe it's from a specific company. Often doesn't need to be paid back later either, unless your sponsor specifies that they want you to pay them back at a later time. And finally, the other one I'm going to address is work study. I'm going to touch on very briefly. So basically, this is money earned by working part-time, usually at the institution that you're going to. So most institutions will have work opportunities for their students. And so if you qualify for work study, that's a way that you can earn that money by working part-time at the institution. And that criteria can vary a little bit as well. So those are different types of aid. Particularly for many international students that I've worked with, these are some of the things that you may or may not be eligible for, or that you might be looking for. So again, you might be eligible for a scholarship from the institution itself. This is often the case that I have found. And this is the case here at MSOE as well. But students are typically not going to be eligible for the USA federal aid. So here that's called FAFSA. That's what is it? Free aid for students basically, but you need to be a domestic student. You need to have a social security number to be able to apply for that. So that's why most international students will not be eligible to apply for our federal aid. But again, you're usually eligible for that scholarship from the institution or several, and then other aid, whether you get, a scholarship from your own country back home, a government scholarship through your government, loans again through a financial institution back in your home country as well, or again that maybe that sponsorship through a family member or a company or things like that. So those are typically what you can look for as far as aid is concerned and what you might be eligible for. What I do encourage you, and what I'll kind of say a few times throughout the presentation, is like as soon as you get in contact with someone from the institution you're applying for, so whether that's an admissions counselor like myself or an advisor or anything like that, just go ahead and ask and see what's available. I get this question all the time, so it's very common. We're very used to receiving this kind of question. What kinds of aid do you have for international students, or what could I be eligible for? And when I don't have the answer, I typically will connect you with, most institutions have a financial aid office dedicated to this kind of thing. So so when students ask me this question, I can give a general answer for what most international students will be eligible for, but then for a specific case, I can refer you to our financial aid office. So that's typically how that works. Let me continue here. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to cover specifically how to apply for scholarships. So this can look different depending on the institution, and I'll touch on that a bit here too. So a lot of institutions will have a separate application for you to fill out to apply for a scholarship. So in addition to the application that you filled out just to gain admission to the institution. So it could be, maybe it's one form for all their available scholarships, or maybe there's multiple individual forms you need to fill out for each scholarship you're applying for. It can vary quite a bit. So that's another thing that you can usually ask, again, that contact you have at the institution, or whether that's connecting with their financial aid office to see what you might be eligible for. So again, my advice is to research institutions ahead of time to see maybe what kind of aid and how much is typically offered to students. That is something usually you can find even just by searching on the internet. You can usually find like, well, how much financial aid is usually granted to students. One thing I will say to be careful about is it's tempting to see like maybe a big number, like, oh, students are, or this institution gave out this much in financial aid to their students this past year. And while that number looks great, you also want to take a few other factors into consideration, which I'll touch on later as well. But you want to consider how much their tuition costs, what kind of aid is being granted to students, because that'll determine, maybe it's kind of aid that you may or may not be eligible for, or just all sorts of things. So don't just look at the amount of aid that's being offered to students. And then I'll go into a little more depth on this as well, but the size and the type of institution you're applying for will often determine the availability of aid. So kind of a smaller versus larger institution, and maybe a private versus public institution will kind of determine the availability of aid, what's even there. So again, small versus large. Again, this will determine, maybe the amount of available aid, just even in general, depending on how much revenue that institution is making, and the size could be a factor with that. The kinds of aid that's available, again, whether it's scholarships or grants or loans, whatever is available, the size can kind of determine that. And also the competitiveness as well. So, if maybe a grant or a scholarship is only going to a select amount of students, the size of the institution that might determine maybe your chances of even getting that financial aid. So you want to consider that as well. What are the criteria for getting the aid, and what are my chances of getting that aid myself? So you want to take that into consideration. And similar to that, private institutions versus public institutions. So private institutions, which MSOE is a private institution. So like we're able to offer like loans, private loans offered through us, scholarships and grants that are very specific to MSOE. So private institutions can often do that. They'll have like little private, personally owned kind of pools of money set aside for their students. The public institutions will like, they'll still offer like whether it's loans, scholarships and grants, but they're limited on what they might be able to offer in that way. So kind of feeding into that, the difference of between the two types of institutions, their dependency on the federal government. So private institutions kind of have a lot more leeway in determining what kind of aid they're offering and who they're offering it to or how many students they're offering it to. Public institutions do have to adhere more to federal guidelines for that. So they're a bit more, it's a bit more dictated of like who gets that aid and what aid is offered. And again, I mentioned this part earlier, but the cost of attendance compared to the available aid at a specific institution. So again, so typically a public institution will cost less overall than a private institution. But when you're looking at how much aid you might be getting from that institution, you want to compare what's the overall cost of the institute of attending the institution versus how much aid you're getting, because often it can be quite comparable. So even though maybe tuition is lower at a public institution, they often can't offer quite as much in financial aid as a private institution. So a private institution might cost more tuition wise, but they're usually able to offer more in aid. So when you do the math there, it can usually come out actually quite close in cost comparison. So then what you really should be looking at is the quality of the institution, but that's another conversation. And then finally, between the two public and private institutions, you want to look at the application process for additional aid as well. So those, because that can look different between institutions. Again, whether that's maybe there's no additional application, which is, I guess, more rare. Usually there is an additional application, or whether it's one application, just basically saying, hey, can someone look at anything I'm eligible for? Or maybe you have to fill out a bunch of separate applications for aid. So that'll vary depending on the institution as well. All right, finding additional funding. So again, this can look very different just depending, but I kind of included some overall guidelines to be going off of. So some external resources. So sometimes the institution will be able to assist you in providing, maybe it's links for external resources. I know MSOE does this. While there's only so much that we offer to our students directly through us, we are aware of a few outside resources that international students can look at for additional scholarships. So I included some examples there, and I'm going to see if I can successfully share. Let me see. If I want to, let me see. All right, so if I just want to look at screen 2 here in general, let me just end this for a second. So you hopefully should be able to see, let me see, actually, let me do this again. Share screen, okay. Here we go. I'm gonna share that with you. So looking at a few different things here. So this one, for example, is NAFSA. My first one listed on the slide there. This is NAFSA's website. So you can see financial aid for undergraduate international students. So there's a lot of good information here. Again, funding factors to consider, calculating cost of attendance, institutional aid. So they kind of go over everything. private loans. So this is a great resource, would be maybe NAFSA for you to look at. Another one might be, this one's just internationalscholarships.com. So it's pretty straightforward. But again, you're looking at kind of the different types of funding available. There's a lot of good articles on these websites as well. So these are, again, just like really good resources here, but you can even do a quick search. So it's like, what are you studying, or where are you studying, or where are you from? Lots of different criteria you can look for. And this is another one I listed on here too, is IEFA. So I go over again, you can do a quick search here, what you're eligible for, a lot of good posts for good information that's here for you. So a lot of questions you can ask, all sorts of different things. So this is something that you just want to maybe talk to, again, that specific institution that you're talking to about. They'll often have those resources for you, or be able to just help point you in the right direction. I'm going to try to get my screen back up to share my presentation. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's share that again. Okay, so those are some examples. So that I did include on there, ask an admissions counselor like myself, or maybe there's an advisor ahead of time that you can ask. So I'm also going to try, there we go, admit there, ahead of time. And then also you can often find other opportunities or other like links or resources on your own if you just kind of know what you're looking for. Maybe it is on your own, maybe it's help from if you have an advisor at your current school or institution, or a counselor to help you with that. But there are definitely tons of resources out there. So definitely see what the institution offers, but also look elsewhere and then see if the institution and advisor there maybe has some resources for you. Also, I'm gonna pull this up. Okay. Yes, I just got a question in the chat. Link for the website. Yes, I will provide those links in the chat at the end there. I just didn't include them on my slideshow because I didn't think that would be super helpful there, because you can't click on it. Okay, finally, I'm gonna just touch on scholarships through MSOE, like, well, scholarship, just how this works in general at MSOE, as an example of what you might look for. So again, this is something I've touched on a little bit here, but knowing what your financial ability is to start with, this is going to be super important, because you want to know where you're starting from. So know what the cost of the tuition is at the institution you're looking at, plus whatever the living expenses might be. So are you going to live off campus? Are you going to live on campus? Are you going to have roommates? Are you living with, maybe it's a relative or a friend that you already have in the US, something like that. Plus, what's the cost of health insurance? Health insurance is often mandatory for international students to have. So, is that something you have to get on your own, or is that something that the institution will help you with, maybe provide? I know MSOE provides a few different options, but so know what the cost of all of these things are. Because what you're going to typically have to do, even to get your I-20 here to get your visa to get to the US, you often need to show proof of finances equivalent to about 1 year's worth of cost of attendance. So meaning that 1 year's worth of tuition, living expenses, health insurance, you often need to provide proof of those funds equivalent to 1 year's worth to get that I-20. So what I'm showing here is just kind of a screenshot of the form that we ask students to fill out, a section of the form we ask students to fill out. So you got to provide where are you getting your funding from? Again, is it, maybe personal funds? Is it you're getting a scholarship or an assistantship? Is it a sponsor, a government sponsorship, or another sponsoring organization? And then total, like what's the total of all of the funding that you're going to be getting from all these sources? So just knowing where you're at financially, super important. So again, kind of breaking this down, what is the cost of living here in the United States? It very much does depend on where you go in the United States. If, when you come here, you're going to find that even from state to state, city to city, it's very different. Cost of living is very different. But these are averages. Health insurance, the average cost of health insurance for students is anywhere between, maybe it's $1,500 to $2,500, and that would be for the academic year typically. Rent. So if you're going to be living off campus in your own apartment or whatever that is, the monthly cost of living in the US is about $700 to $1,000 per month. Again, that can vary a lot depending on where you live. Transportation, if you're not living on campus, how are you getting to campus, or how are you even just getting around if you need to do maybe you need to go grocery shopping, so you need to get some food, or you just wanting to go out and do anything, any sort of activity. Public transportation monthly, that can be anywhere from $40 a month to $100 a month, depending on what kind of transportation you're taking. Again, food, how much is your food costing? Where are you getting your food from? Are you going out to eat at restaurants or quick food? Or are you going to grocery stores? Where are you getting that from, and how much is that going to cost you? And then, of course, finally, the miscellaneous expenses, so your own personal expenses, whatever you're spending money on, again, whether that's maybe going to an activity or an event with some friends that you've made, or whatever it is that you're paying for. So you want to know what the cost of living is. You want to have an idea of all this ahead of time. And your admissions counselor or advisor can generally help you kind of estimate these costs, certainly. But yeah, these are just all factors to consider. So again, this is just an example from MSOE, but like, for example, our tuition costs for this academic year, the 2022 to 2023 academic year, it's about $46,000 per year. Estimated living expenses for the year are going to be about $12,000 to $13,000. Again, your living expenses, where you're living, your food, all that stuff. Health insurance for us, that's just over $2,000 for the year. So for example, the estimated cost of attendance for MSOE for one academic year is about $61,000, which again looks like a lot, right? But then you consider that we offer a $25,000 per year scholarship to all of our accepted international students, and that's a merit scholarship. And of course, I mentioned you can definitely look for external resources. Again, talking to your admissions counselor or an advisor about what else you could be eligible for, but all of our undergraduate international students are automatically granted that $25,000 per year scholarship, which brings down the total cost of attendance per year to about $36,000 rather than that $61,000. And for us, like I said, no additional application for that scholarship is necessary. That's automatically applied to you. So that's another thing you want to consider, so that's why you want to consider like what the cost of living is and then what the aid is going to be. Makes a huge difference. So then some of the last stuff I have here is just going to be additional scholarships that we offer are some examples. So we have what's called donor funded scholarships. So that's pretty much what it sounds like. Other people, usually whether it's some alum of MSOE or some other companies or anything like that, they will have funded a scholarship or scholarships for students. And sometimes it's usually a limited amount. So maybe only a few students get it, or maybe they're offering a little bit to a lot of students. It varies. But on our website, we have a general scholarship application form, and that allows students to be considered for all of the scholarships that fall into that category of donor funded scholarships. And then we also offer private scholarships. Like I mentioned, we are a private institution, so we do offer private scholarships through MSOE, and each of those scholarships has its own separate application. There's different deadlines for each one. There's different criteria for each one. So they're all very specific, but those are all listed on our website too. And most institutions will have things like this available. So those are just some additional things you want to look at. So I think that's pretty much what I have for the presentation. I will go ahead and see here. So here's the Q&A part. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I will pull those links for those websites here. All right, so you should just be able to see me now, because if I stop sharing, okay. So let me go pull those links for those 3 websites that I shared. And in the meantime, feel free to keep sending me your questions, as long as I can see the chat here. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Okay. So first of all, let me just send all of these. So I'll send the NAFSA. There's that one. This one's international scholarships. And then the other one I had was IEFA. So I will do that one here. Okay, so I shared those. Let me see if I can. Here. Oh my goodness, getting too many notifications. Okay. Yep, link for the website. So I just provided those. All right, you have been talking about the total cost for undergraduate students per year. What about graduate programs? That is a good question. I am mainly focusing on undergraduate, since that's the main population we get, but we do have graduate programs here at MSOE too. So graduate, that's a bit different. I can even pull that up as well. Let me. So graduate. Yes, so tuition for graduate, that's going to be closer to about 25,000 per year. Living expenses are the same as for undergraduate, so that's going to be that 12 to 13,000, and then health insurance will be the same at about that 2,000. So total estimated cost of attendance for graduate students for an academic year is going to be about 40 to 41,000 per year. And what's important to know too, I'm not going to dive too much into this, but for graduate, for example, MSOE does not offer like a financial aid specifically to graduate students. Unfortunately, we're just not able to offer that. Some institutions do though. So that's an important factor to consider. Some do, but so for us, that total cost would be that 41,000, and that's what it is. And that is for master's programs. I should clarify, you asked master's or PhD. We do not offer PhD programs. So that'll vary. All right, then another question, are applications for MSOE still open? Yes, they are. We have rolling admissions, so you can apply for any start term at any time. So yes, absolutely. But one thing to consider too is how long everything will take. So from submitting your application to submitting the additional documents you need, to getting an admission decision, to then getting your I-20, to then booking a visa appointment and having that appointment, and then whether you're approved, then booking your flight here. So it's a lot that has to happen. So while we do have applications still open, that's of course something you want to check with every institution too, how long, what are their deadlines, but consider everything else that takes time. All right, let's see here. I got a couple more questions. I want to ask about additional fundings. You provided websites like IEFA? Do those websites just provide information about how to obtain additional funding, or can you apply for additional funding through the websites? Good question. Both, and it'll depend on the website. I think like international scholarships, I think that one will offer, like, I think you can apply for scholarships through there. I haven't done too much in-depth research on any of these sites, quite honestly. I refer students to them quite a bit, but it's usually on them to figure out what's available on there. So it'll depend on the website, but on some of them, you should be able to apply right for scholarships from there. But then all of the websites should have information, just generally what international students can look for as far as funding is concerned. Good question. Do we offer teaching assistants or research assistantships for master's students? It depends on the program here. For graduate students, some of our graduate programs do, namely one of them does. Our Master of Science and Engineering program students they have the opportunity to get an assistantship. Most of our other graduate programs, unfortunately not though. So that is a limitation too. So that's another thing you want to check with the institution if those are offered. Then do these organizations fund international students? So if you mean these I don't know which organizations. The links I provided, again, some of them will have a way to apply for scholarships right there. Some organizations will just, straight up fund international students, provided to them. So it just very much depends. Can you apply using the links you provided? Again, it depends. I think at internationalscholarships.com, I think you can. You just have to check on each of the websites to see if there's an option to apply, or whether it's just talking about information for different scholarships and financially for international students. I should also mention I am limited on time with my current Zoom account. So I only have like a couple minutes left, a little less than a couple minutes. So I know I had this time blocked off for the whole hour, but unfortunately I will not be able to do that. My institution does not have the membership that allows us to go in for an unlimited amount of time. Does MSOE offer merit-based scholarships? Yes, actually that $25,000 scholarship I mentioned is a merit scholarship. And that is the main one that we offer to international students, really. So that's really what we have available there. Okay. Those are all the questions that I see. And I also know that I have less than a minute left on here. So this session has been recorded. I'm gonna send it to Faithful here, who's been the representative for Education USA joining me here. So I'll send it to her. And if you have any questions, you can reach out directly to her. And of course, she has my contact information, so you can reach out to me as well. But I appreciate all of you joining me today, and hopefully this was really helpful. And again, I will be here at this time next week presenting on a different topic. So I look forward to seeing all of you there as well. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And thanks again.